Welcome to the Heard on West Exec podcast, the official podcast of the American Cornerstone Institute's Executive Branch for America program. My name is Todd Thurman with the American Cornerstone Institute. Today I'm joined by Seth Appleton. Seth, who now works in the private sector, previously served at the Department of Housing and Urban Development as an assistant secretary. After a long, distinguished career in Congress where he went from staff assistant all the way to chief of staff. Thank you for joining us today, Seth.
Todd, thanks for having me here today. Excited to talk about my career in government and particularly my service in the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Well, great. So what made you interested in making the jump from Congress to the executive branch in the first place?
You know, it's an interesting story because I worked in the House of Representatives, as you mentioned, kind of, all the way from staff assistant to chief of staff. I had always kind of had in my legislative portfolio for many years kind of housing and financial services issues. And my last boss on the Hill, Congressman Blaine Luetkemeyer, was the chair of the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee for a couple of years. And we worked on HUD reform legislation. And so that kind of that really sparked my interest in working in the executive branch and made it an opportunity that I really couldn't turn down. That work made me think more and more about what HUD did on a day-to-day basis and how to support its mission and the people it serves in a different capacity.
Great. Did working in Congress kind of give you a kind of a base knowledge of what to expect coming into the executive branch?
I don't think it gave me a base knowledge of what to expect, but it certainly helped me understand kind of the agency and its core programs and certainly its mission better, and maybe how it was organized. But at the end of the day, and certainly kind of the priorities that legislators had when it came to oversight of the agency or, modernizing some of its programs. But at the end of the day, until you get there, you really don't know what's under the hood. But I do feel like I had kind of a decent amount of background for an outsider, I suppose.
So even with that background, would you say there was a big steep learning curve?
Yeah, I would say that it was steep, and I think it is for everybody, frankly, like regardless of what agency and in what kind of position, but not as steep as if I hadn't had kind of that experience as a staffer in the legislative branch. Learning the manufacturing process of how the agency works wasn't something I had a lot of visibility into on Capitol Hill. We periodically had oversight hearings and moved legislation involving the agency, but, it's frankly one of many things you're working on a given day in a congressional office to something that's 100% of your focus at kind of a much deeper level. So I think that, again, my background on the Hill helped prepare me. But I also think that some of our colleagues, frankly, that had private sector experience also had some really unique and valuable skills that they brought to the table, frankly, that helped and benefited the agency and those it serves tremendously.
Great. What would you say was the biggest lesson that you had to learn, and how did you learn it?
Well, so beyond the existing programs, right, and just like, taking a step back, I had a couple of different roles at HUD, right? So I came in based on my background and was in the Office of Congressional and Intergovernmental Relations in a couple of different positions, including as the acting assistant secretary and the general deputy assistant secretary, kind of the number 2 job there. And so from that perspective, I think I had a good grasp of what that office did. The policy development and research office that I was, privileged to lead as assistant secretary, I knew some of what it did, but it really, until I got to the building, didn't know all of the really critical things that it did. So whether it's, supporting the FHA mortgage insurance program, through kind of risk and credit policy kind of expertise to doing regulatory impact analysis for kind of rulemakings that the agency is doing, to undertaking, research projects, demonstrations, studies, right? There's just, managing economic information kind of collection and dissemination. Like, there's just this whole range of activities done by that office. Similarly, I also had the privilege to lead Ginnie Mae at the same time for 15 months. And so that's, a securitization program that guarantees, with the full faith and credit of the United States, that investors in mortgage-backed securities, backed by, loans from HUD, the VA, and USDA, are going to receive timely payment of principal and interest on time and in full kind of every month. But anyways, so those are really kind of important, consequential core functions of HUD that you got to look at on a day-to-day basis. And it's an intricate and monumental task in and of itself. But then when a natural disaster, for instance, or a pandemic hits, you have a whole set of additional responsibilities that you have to take on in addition to your day job. And so I think I first learned that when hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria struck in the fall of 2017. And basically, the entire agency had to stand up in a disaster recovery function in addition to its daily work that it was accomplishing.
Yeah, and were you surprised about all the agencies that were kind of intertwined with HUD? Most people wouldn't think that that HUD works with FEMA or many of the other agencies that they work with.
Yeah, so on disaster recovery, right, like our closest partners are FEMA and Small Business Administration. Those are like our key partners in the immediate aftermath of a disaster, and kind of those relationships were really helpful in making sure there was a coordinated response. On other issues, right, like, in the post-Dodd-Frank world, frankly, that established the Federal Housing Finance Agency, it has kind of the oversight function over Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the federal home loan banks now, which was previously part of HUD before the financial crisis. It also gave CFPB authority over real estate settlement, like the RESPA, and everything that goes under that. That was previously part of HUD. And then Ginnie Mae, as I mentioned, guarantees loans not only from HUD, but also from VA and the USDA. And you also have OMB playing an important role in the budget process and in management and regulatory activities, among other things. So all of this, necessitates kind of leadership interacting with and building relationships with peers at all kinds of other agencies. And it really was eye-opening, frankly, particularly, when there was, not only like various cross-functional projects, but certainly natural disasters and the pandemic brought us into very close contact with all of our partner agencies on a daily basis.
And what's something that, if you knew on day one, would have really helped you in the first or second year?
So I mentioned a second ago OMB, which is the Office of Management and Budget, and I came to HUD viewing the president's budget from the prism of a Capitol Hill staffer, which is the budget gets delivered kind of in the spring. You look at it and perhaps incorporate some of its funding requests or legislative proposals into your work, and then kind of move on. In the executive branch, the president's budget is not just kind of a financial document. It's an articulation of the administration's policy that's enduring. And so I think that kind of, I wish I would have known that and had that perspective when I was on Capitol Hill, because I would have been a better staffer on Capitol Hill, frankly. And certainly that was something that would be valuable to know on day one, kind of as an executive branch staffer.
So what was your most fun day working at HUD, and what was your least fun day, would you say?
Well, I'll give you a couple on most fun. Probably the top of the list professionally was when we, as a leadership team, had an off-site planning session at Camp David. it really just hits you, right? Like how many people get to do this as part of their job? So I think that was kind of an amazing experience and put things into perspective as far as the weight of the responsibility that you carry as a executive branch appointee. I would say my least fun day was a Sunday in March of 2020 at the onset of the COVID pandemic, when it was unclear whether or not there would be widespread disruption and negative impacts in the mortgage market. I think I was on the phone the entire day with Ginnie Mae counterparties, with other HUD leaders, with folks at various other agencies, talking through what this might look like and kind of preparing for the worst. I think the agencies all, frankly, pulled together remarkably well, and with Congress ensured that the housing market wasn't disrupted. But I don't think that was a given, right? Like on that Sunday in March, and I think it was because of the efforts of kind of folks throughout many agencies across the government that we were able to avert, a larger disaster there.
And how did serving in the federal government help you with your transition to the private sector? And, do you make different decisions based on your knowledge of how the federal government works now?
So look, when you go to an agency, you certainly gain valuable perspective and depth on the subject matter that's kind of within the purview of that department, right? So for me, it's housing policy. And I think you also at the same time get it when you work kind of on some of these cross-functional projects, get an understanding of the priorities of other agencies too, and kind of what is being juggled and coordinated across the entire federal government on a daily basis. So I think that was definitely valuable perspective that I didn't have before I went in, and kind of gives me insight into how folks at the agencies may be thinking kind of and approaching issues going forward.
And what kind of networking opportunities would you say there are when working in the executive branch? Did you meet a lot of people that, you leaned on, post-administration?
Yeah, look, first of all, the fact that my, boss at HUD is Dr. Ben Carson, like the world famous pediatric neurosurgeon, like that, is something I would have never fathomed when I started my career in government, right? And so that was just an amazing opportunity to work for someone with his kind of approach to policymaking and also to life, frankly, and really was a valuable kind of experience. More broadly, I made what I hope will be lifelong friends from among my former colleagues. When you go through like high stakes, high pressure situations, like responding to a natural disaster or a pandemic, it really forges deep bonds. And so, I'm always thankful that Dr. Carson had such a, methodical, even-keeled approach to the work that we did to help keep us grounded. And, at the end of the day, you're spending more time with these folks than your own family on some days. And so, it's hard not to build kind of important and deep bonds with your colleagues in those situations.
Absolutely. One last question is, what was the most satisfying part of working in the executive branch?
So I would say to see how the programs and agency is operating, that you can kind of look at on paper maybe, to see how they're actually impacting the lives of our fellow citizens across the country. At an agency, you really have the opportunity to not only discuss policy matters of great importance at kind of headquarters, but you can also get out into the field and gain really, really, really important perspective on how programs can be modernized or optimized or better supported in order to serve our ultimate customers, which are the American people, right? Like the American taxpayer is supporting HUD on a daily basis, and I think at an agency, it's really important to be able to go out into the field and see on the ground how the programs are being executed and how they're impacting people.
Well, great. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Seth, for joining us.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Todd.